Yo, 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 welcome to another episode of Ramble. I am your host, Corban Ford. Follow me on Twitter at Corban NBA. This is Sports Ethos presentation. So check out Sports Ethos on Twitter at Sports Ethos, online sportsethos.com. A lot of good stuff there to check out for sure. Today, y'all, I'm excited. We are going to have our first crack at the 2024 NBA draft. And listen, there are a few others better here. In fact, I can't think of any than my good friend, SBC alum, basketball scout, all around just good person, Stevie Cozens. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Stevie Cozens, all together, STEVIECOZENS. I'll put it out there in the description. But Stevie, my friend, how are you doing?
Dude, I'm good. I'm excited to be here. I had my own pod for about 18 months or 2 years, and just the grind of that. And it's been a minute since I've been on someone else's pod, and obviously, you and I have been chatting, for a few years now. So I'm excited to jump on your pod and just talk some basketball, talk about the upcoming NBA draft. I appreciate your time, man.
Oh, pleasure is all mine. I thank you for sure. Like, this is a blast. But before, getting started, it's always been a minute since we've talked on the show. But a lot's happened with you and your basketball journey. And so for the uninitiated, for the newcomers, update for myself, can you kind of share or describe, your basketball journey up to this point? I
Yeah.
think especially with you kind of your scouting, your consulting work, you're one of the founders of Airtime Scouting, and that's the field I wanted to get into. So I would really love to hear just about your journey.
Yeah. Thank you, man. So, man, my journey's a crazy one. Like, I'm super grateful to be where I am today, but I also, on the other hand, I feel like I'm still so new to basketball in general. Like I've really only been working in it like 4 or 5 years, and so yeah, my journey's pretty crazy. So, grew up in a small town in New Zealand. I actually played all sports: soccer, basketball, other sports like cricket and rugby, which people in the US won't be very familiar with. Kind of like similar to American football or baseball. But in terms of basketball, we played it at middle school, but at high school it's crazy. There was just one team at high school. Unless you were the man, you couldn't play, and I wasn't the man at that sport. There was no like coaching, or there wasn't really a way to get into basketball. So I didn't really play much growing up once I left middle school, which was kind of disappointing. Um, I was crazy about sports though, like the job that I had at the time, I was working in like management for kind of like department stores like Whole Foods and that kind of stuff. And it was a
Mhm.
good, earned some pretty good money, and did some travel, and it was a good career. At the time when I was working, I was sort of like third in charge of a pretty big department store in Wellington, which is the capital city where I've always lived.
Okay.
And there were two dudes I worked with at the time, and I actually had lunch with one of them the other day, and he was just like, "Don't forget how I was one of the ones who got you into basketball." And I was like, "It's kind of true." So at the time, I was into basketball, but I didn't have like the bug. I wasn't deep in it, like not even
Mhm.
at a fan level or anything. I was just like a light fan. And Steven Adams had just got drafted, and the amazing thing was Steven Adams used to come in and shop at our department stores because his high school was like just down the road from um, from our shop. So Steven Adams would come in, like 16th, 11th, 16-year-old. He would come into the shop, and um, he got drafted, and then my buddy at the time, he was just super into basketball, and I started getting quite a bit more of an interest in the NBA. Um, and then I was going over to the US with my partner at the time, and we went and stayed in the Bay Area. We were on Palo Alto, and I was like, I'm going to go and watch an NBA game. By now my fandom was like quite a bit deeper, where I was following the NBA on a pretty sort of regular basis. Checking in the scores. Started like a Twitter account, and so yeah, I was in the US, and I thought I'd go along to an NBA game, and I caught the train and then the BART from Palo Alto into San Francisco, and then the BART took us to Oakland. And at the time, that was the old Warriors Stadium. And like for someone from New Zealand, when you don't get to go, like we don't have, like we don't see NBA players, we don't go to huge stadiums or anything like that for basketball. Like when you're on the BART and then it rocks up into Oakland there, and you walk through the tunnel, and then you walk past, like at the time the Oakland Raiders were still there. You know, all those stadiums were sort of collected. It was like, it was a spiritual experience for me, man. I can't lie. Like it was crazy. And you walked into the stadium, and it was like, I get goosebumps thinking about it now. It was something else. So when I got my seat, I had the cheapest, most far away seat that you can imagine, but it didn't matter. Like they were playing, it was the Golden State Warriors playing the New Orleans Pelicans.
Fun.
And Buddy Hield was on the Pelicans, and the place where I was at, a lot of the people that were sitting next to me were like season ticket holders, like OG season ticket holders. They all knew everyone that was sitting in the seats next to them. It was cool, man. It was just like a friendly atmosphere and vibe, but they were super passionate. And at the time, the Pelicans had Rajon Rondo, Anthony Davis, Drew Holiday, and then the Warriors
team.
Yeah. So like, man, this was like these two teams were stacked. And just being in an NBA game, I was pinching myself and realizing, man, I love this game. Like this game is, how did I not have this love before? And then Steph Curry broke the NBA record for 3-pointers made that night. And honestly, like that was the night my life changed forever. I have and I still go back and look at the videos from that game. Like, I don't know, that there was just something about like being in the arena, the energy of the people, being in the US and experiencing it firsthand. I was hooked, man. I was hooked. That was like something changed in me there. And I was like, how do I get involved in this crazy world of basketball? So I started a blog, like quite quickly after that. Signed up for a sports journalism diploma back in New Zealand. I traveled back to watch the playoffs the next year. And then I started doing some writing and some blogging work. And I applied to be site expert for the Portland Trailblazers fan site at the time, Rip City Project. And even though it was not like, anyone that knows the sort of fan side of stuff, it's like, it's a good sort of leg up, even though it's not like, you're not being paid a bunch of money. But for me, it was like a way to get my foot in the door. I liked the Blazers at the time, and from there I was just like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to get into this game or work in it long term, but this is a way for me to sort of get my foot in the door. And so I had a Cleaning the Glass account, I had Basketball Reference, I had Synergy, and I just thought, I'm a real numbers guy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, in my market, in the Blazers market, I'm going to do the best like statistical tweets out there to like grow my name and grow my following. And so I just started tweeting, man. I was just tweeting and tweeting and tweeting and tweeting. And I was growing a little bit of a following. And then some like big accounts started sharing my stuff, like Baller's Life, NBA Central, things started like popping off a little bit. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. So I sort of had a little bit of a niche, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna need to go specific just on the Blazers. And then some of the like role players and bench guys started like liking my stuff and then sharing a little bit. And then I did a few articles which sort of popped off, some a little bit controversial, but like they were only controversial in terms of like, I was just trying to talk about the things that people already knew maybe they didn't want to talk about. And then I had one tweet. It was the end of Damian Lillard's biggest season, and it was, I knew by then what would pop and what wouldn't. And Dame was only the third player in NBA history after Michael Jordan and Steph Curry to average 30 points per game and shoot 40% from three. And I was like, if I tweet this thing is going to go viral. This is going to go viral. And
that's cool.
And I tweeted it, and it started popping. And then I went away from my phone and I was just working away, and I came back and my phone is just like lighting up. It was just going ding, 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 ding. I was like, what's happened? Like, and Damian Lillard had shared the tweet, and I was just like, my
Yo.
phone honestly, my phone went off for like 3 days. And it wasn't like, obviously you don't like get paid or anything like that, but for me it was like Dame sharing my tweet, quote tweeting my tweet was like, it showed what I was doing. People were listening to, people wanted to hear what I had to say. Um, and then from there on out, it was like most of the Blazer players like were sharing my tweets often. CJ McCollum was often sharing my tweets. Dame shared my tweets. And I started to grow a big following. And I was like, if I continue growing this following, I can use this for something else down the road. So did this for about 2 years. And then at the time, I was like, I want to try and get athletes to the States. I want to try and get athletes from New Zealand and Australia to the States. I want to help kids get on scholarship, and I want to help kids get to the NBA. That was like my goal. And I had goals written down. Like I had a podcast, and I was having NBA agents and players and administrators and all sorts of cool people on the pod, which was cool. I was helping out at local events in New Zealand. Shout out Hoop Nation. People have employed me since 2020 to help run some of New Zealand's biggest independent like travel events like AAU. And at the end of 2020, I placed my first athlete in Division 1 basketball. And from there, I started using Twitter to help promote athletes the way that I did with my NBA stuff. So I would tweet about an athlete, and then I would sometimes get DMs from, and like this isn't me boasting, it was just being like, Twitter works, man. We might not like the way that it's run now, but this thing, Twitter has given me so much. I wouldn't be where I am today if I don't think it would. Well, it would be, but it would have to have been some sort of other way for me to get here.
Yeah.
Twitter has given me so much. And like, for example, I was helping an athlete, and I dropped a tweet, and an NBA trainer messaged me within 15 minutes being like, I've seen this player playing, let me help you. And the kid had 2 Power 5 offers within 24 hours. Like this, and this isn't me gassing myself up. This is showing the power of Twitter. It's its international reach and how it was able to help athletes from a tiny little country, New Zealand, on the bottom of the world, other side of the world. From there, I started placing more athletes 2020, 2021, 2022. And in 2022, myself and my business partner, Michael Hubin, shout out Michael, known him since 2019. He was a dude who'd been doing a lot of this work. And I haven't talked about sports business classrooms, so we can probably come back to that. But Michael was just like, he was just a dog in terms of his work ethic and just always tweeting about kids, promoting kids, helping to place them. And he was doing some scouting work around the Australian NBL. He's from Australia. He'd done interviewing for NBA Australia. So like he's interviewed guys like Dyson Daniels, Josh Giddey, you name Luke Travers, you name any of the big names in Australian basketball at the moment, he's interviewed them. He's done stories on them, in person, lives. He's done all that kind of stuff. And he has a great scouting eye. Like he's the guy, and he's someone I've learned so much from in terms of the Australian stuff, but also just scouting in general. And we talked about forming a legitimate scouting business. So we recorded 550 names, 250 men's college players, and 300 high school players in the next 4 recruiting classes, and then all the kids that were currently at college in the US. And we started building a website, and we had all of these kids' profiles, height, weight, wingspan, date of birth, film, intel. Like, we want to be, and this is what we're still striving to do, is be the Australian New Zealand Draft Express. And if you were to log into the site now, or even someone from the NBA, I believe the product that we have, the intel that we have, it's of a very high level. It's a flash, really nice website. It's got filters. It's got, if you were an NBA GM or a college, director of basketball operations, or you were a head coach, and you're like, I want to recruit a center in the class of 2025, you jump onto the site, you log in, and we've created a really professional product. So we got certified by the NCAA. I got our scouting service certified by the NCAA at the start of this year. We have the only NCAA approved scouting service for all of Australia and New Zealand. So that means we're allowed to scout Australia and New Zealand. So, not only are we the first,
Wow.
we're the only one down here doing this thing. And we launched in since then. We've got a bunch of Power 5 schools on, bunch of Division 1 schools. We're working with agencies. We're working with high schools, prep schools. And since I placed my first athlete at the end of 2020, I've now placed 32 athletes and scholarships all around the world.
Wow.
To around $4 million of financial aid to families. And for me, like, growing up, like, my mum, she was always really big into community service and helping people. She was volunteering, running like the local athletics, or she was helping our sports teams, or she was doing like theater, performing arts, and us kids were coming along as well. So for me, I always wanted to help kids. And like, obviously we have a formalized scouting service, but for me, I try and help the athletes, and then be that, like, can I help connect them with a graphic designer? Can I help connect them with a photographer? Can I help them with a strength and conditioning plan, or physiotherapist, or nutritionist? Like, I'm deep in this because I believe in the kids. I believe in their character. I believe in who they are. And so, casting it back to 2019 when I did sports business classroom, I didn't talk about that as part of my journey, but the things that I learned there, and the people that I met, and like people like Sam Shin and Winter Turner and these sort of people, I'm now out here doing this while my friends that I met at SBC are doing the same. The life-changing experience for a sports business classroom, in terms of like the scouting analytics stuff that I learned back then, when I sat in SBC on day one and we did NBA draft in terms of scouting, I thought then I'd love to do a website that had all the best Australians. Sorry, actually, just at the time it was just New Zealanders. I'd love to do a website with New Zealand athletes on it. And fast forward 4 years,
Here you are.
Here I am on this podcast chatting to you. And so, yeah, that's like about sort of 10 minutes on my journey. I'm super grateful to be here. Like, super grateful to be here. And I love this game. Like, I truly love this game. It's a vessel for social change, for helping people. I'm a real people person, and like, I love this community because of the people that are in it. And I not only do I care about the kids, but I care about fostering relationships with good people, and believing if I do that I'll be successful and I'll better put some money in my pocket. So yeah, that's kind of like 4 years in a little bit of a nutshell, but I'm super excited to be chatting basketball with you here, and appreciate you giving the time to talk about who I am and where I came from.
No, I thank you. I mean, obviously, I know being a buddy of yours, a little bit of your story, but just like the continued progression, and the drive, because I've been on some, I've had some, I mean, sports business classroom has been big for me, obviously, and just connections and meeting people, but it has been something on a personal for myself, the drive of like not seeing the success that you'd want to see, and then maybe kind of fading out, and just kind of back and forth. The consistency is something I'm really striving to do. And so hearing your story, hearing the drive, and just knowing like, yes, this is something I love, this is something I want to do, and trying to use that as constant fuel to keep going, that is the thing I'm trying to work on. And so, I mean, for anyone else listening, like, you're hearing from the best of just being persistent and continue to go after it. But like, even for myself, someone who's trying to be in the same kind of realm as you, it's just more words of advice to just kind of continue to stay after it. Because I have been someone who's like, I've gone for a bit, and when I go, it's great, and then get a little discouraged a little bit, fall back, and next thing you know, it's like you're climbing right back up that hill, rolling that snowball up. So definitely has been a little bit of a challenge for me. But hearing this again, it's galvanizing. So I do appreciate that.
No worries, man. Yeah, and like, for me, I've met lots of people who haven't been, or even still aren't, when they're successful in their careers, they're not like basketball experts in terms of exactly what you think you should be in that field,
Yeah.
And people might challenge me and be like, oh, when you're watching that kid, like, tell me what the pick and roll coverage is. And maybe I probably can't tell you all that stuff. But what I can tell you is that I'll outwork everyone else in New Zealand and Australia, probably outside of Michael. Michael works super, super hard, but between us, I'll outwork everyone else down here, you know. I'll have relationships with all of the families, and I'll be able to tell you what they had for breakfast yesterday to that level, you know. I'll be able to tell you the exact intel on who they are. And maybe I don't have the basketball knowledge at the highest levels in terms of like, you know, some of that stuff with like pick and roll with defensive coverages, but I'll be able to give you the film. I'll be able to tell you the person to chat to understand who they are. And I'll be able to tell you who their family is, you know. I'll be able to connect you with their mum. Like, I'll be able to do things at better levels across the board than anyone else out here. And I have confidence in my abilities to do this stuff. And so, you know, anyone listening in here, like, I'm self-made. Like, I didn't play elite sport. I didn't coach at the highest level or anything like that. I just got here because I worked my ass off, and I continue to each day. And so my advice is just like, start where you are. Do you know what I mean? Like, you get discouraged because you're not getting anywhere, and it's like, I get it. Like, I quit my, you know, successful 6-figure job to work full time in basketball, and there's been weeks where, like, you know, I've been worrying where my next paycheck is going to come from so I can pay rent. But it's like, you only get one shot at this life. It's like, if you love basketball, or I don't know, you might love whatever, making up. You know what I mean? And you're like, I want to start my own ice cream truck. Well, it's like, the only way you can do it is just to work your ass off and just like outwork other people. And what is your thing? You know, like how are you going to add value? So yeah, man, I'm all for like having these conversations and just figuring out ways that you can live your dreams.
Well, I appreciate you, man. I say this again. Thank you so much. And I mean, now listen, it sounds like we're wrapping up, but we're really just kind of getting started here. But I wanted to definitely start there. But let's take this basketball knowledge. We've been talking around it, how big it is, how important it is to us. So let's kind of apply it now with talk on this current draft class. Because let me tell you, Stevie, let me ask you before I even give my thoughts. What are your thoughts on this draft class as a whole? I'm curious because I've heard things. I've done my own independent research, and that's my thoughts.
Yeah. I got you. So I haven't been able to keep up as much with the draft classes, you know, recently, as I've been really deep on Australian, New Zealand prospects. But what I have seen is that I don't think this draft has. This is always like Twitter discourse can sometimes ruin the nuance of the understanding in terms of how this stuff works. And when I'm going to preface my next comment with saying, like, there will always be people that will pop off in drafts that don't currently show as they're having star upside. That's the way that it will work. And people will get torn down and be like, oh, you said this guy was going to be 12 and now he's a 10-time All-NBA player. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. So for me, I don't think that this class in the top 5 has the star upside that previous classes have had. But I think that it will have a bunch of really solid, like, 10-year starters and some people that do have star upside. But I don't think that this class has the significant upside or, like, you know, rock solid all-star or NBA guys that previous drafts have had. That doesn't mean that other guys can't pop off. But for me, when you're evaluating and you're looking at potential classes, and this is what I do as well, obviously, is when I'm looking at the 2025 college class from New Zealand and Australia, I'm evaluating based on who are the guys that have upside. Now, I could tell you that in 2025, just comparing to this draft class, I can tell you in 2025 from New Zealand and Australia, for example, that there are dudes there that maybe they're crazy harder workers and they have upside that potentially to go all the way. But when you're comparing it an NBA lens, you have to look at who are the guys you look at that are sure things now. And I don't think this class has the significant upside that we've seen in the last couple of NBA draft classes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely, because I mean, I look at, 2022, 2023, there's always some at least key standout guys that either have shown they've had the upside in the NBA, or at least we thought going into the draft that they clearly were. Like, Jabari Smith Jr. may not have panned out, and Paolo Banchero still has room to grow, and all these other things. But, like, when you went to the draft, like, you looked and said, okay, you know what? We could build around these guys. Like, Jabari, 6'10" dude who shot like no other and had defensive potential. And if he can get a handle, oh my goodness, right? And then Paulo, somebody who like, with his ability to score the ball at a high rate, like boom. And then of course Victor Wembanyama, like come on now, one of the best prospects and if not the best in the last 20 years. I still hold LeBron, but still, like boom. And then Scoot Henderson, who hasn't played well, but like going into the season, I was like, okay, like the Hornets messed up. And speaking of the Hornets, Brandon Miller, who I looked at as like, your kind of average 3-and-D role player, but he's had some runs. So there was players, basically, like you said, there's players that you could slot into a role of, okay, if we come draft high in the draft, if we have a selection high in the draft, this guy we could look at and potentially build around. And build around in terms of featuring, like not them being part of the core, which like, yes, that's a thing, but potentially being like the tentpole player with which the core is branched out of. And yeah, I don't see that here. And mind you, it's still early and all that, but normally there's some flashes. And like you said, there will be players who kind of come out of the woodwork as the season continues. But it is a shocker to go like looking at it right now and be like, okay, interesting. And I guess that kind of to answer the second question I had for you, which is, is this a very weak draft class in terms of potential NBA superstars, or does that list go deeper to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I look at the guys that we've sort of looked at with that top 5 or 6 and the names you mentioned prior to the show, there are guys that have that upside. I just think like, maybe they're athletic freaks who haven't seen, we haven't seen their advanced sort of skill stuff. They haven't showed creation off the dribble or high level passing to show that they're going to be franchise cornerstones, or they're amazing defensive guys, who could potentially be future defensive player of the year. But does that mean that they're going to be Supermax or NBA dudes? Maybe not. But you can't tell when someone's going to pop. And if I look at, guys that have popped off in the last 12 months in terms of the NBA, two names come to mind, and just random guys like Tyrese Maxey and Tyrese Halliburton. Now, both of those guys, the NBA and sport is so fickle, where both of those guys, they may have been all NBA level dudes on different teams, but opportunity was the reason that they got what they got. Now, someone might argue with me and be like, nah, Halliburton was going to be this good, or Maxey was going to be this good. Yeah, like Maxey is still the player that he is with James Harden's on the team, but your 16 point per game production is not the same as 24 per, at the moment he's at 28, 24 per game production when you're looking at the way this works. So this thing is fickle, man, and no doubt there's these players that are here and the upcoming draft class that maybe have some of that stuff, but at the end of the day, they've got to be drafted by teams who are going to put them in the best situation to succeed, and then be able to go on and have that opportunity to get production to show, hey, first I'm a good starter, I'm a 10-year starter, I'm a defensive player of the year, then I'm an all-star and then an all-NBA guy. So yeah, it's interesting, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's something I definitely want to watch more, obviously, as the draft goes on, and guys who, it's a team scouting exercise, like a building exercise for myself. Like, okay, what attributes does XYZ player bring that you go, hey, put them in the right situation and see what happens there. But yeah, it definitely is something interesting. And it kind of goes to your own personal philosophy. And speaking of philosophy, there's a common question I ask when I talk about the draft with anyone, but what is your personal philosophy of BPA, best player available, versus team need when it comes to selecting the draft? And how would you apply it to this specific draft class, which could be different, because last year there were a few players where it's like, listen, forget like what we need, that player is who we need, right? Or like, I don't know if there's that player here in this class.
Yeah, so I think you should always draft best player available. We talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder, for example, when they had Harden, Durant, Westbrook, Serge Ibaka. Now, people might argue and be like, well, why would you take Harden when you've got Westbrook there? It was like, well, they're a completely different player, and I think you should always draft the best player available, and then you should figure it out later. And if I looked at, if we looked at some of these other things that we discussed, like Maxey and Halliburton, for example, regardless of who drafted them and if they got traded, it's, you never know when you may need that player to pop off. And the Philadelphia 76ers, whether or not you believe that they've achieved their ceiling as a basketball team yet, what you've seen is Maxey was ready to go last year, probably.
Yeah.
He was ready to go, and then they initiated a trade to give him a better role. Now, at the time when they drafted him, was he the best player available at their spot? He probably was.
Mm.
Now, the Denver Nuggets picked Nikola Jokic with, I think it was like the 41st pick, and it was in the second round.
Yeah, 40. Yeah, definitely late in the second. 46
Yeah.
or
Now,
something.
he was the best player available when they picked, but they probably picked someone else in the first round. But he was the best player available when they
When
made
they
that.
select.
Yeah. And so I think you should always take best player available, because at the end of the day, the draft rules, especially these days with the player power movement, it means that there will always be a time when you can make a move. When there's one unhappy team and it's a Zach LaVine or it's a James Harden, that side will try and make a move, meaning you as an NBA team are then able to move in and be like, we're going to take advantage of this by bringing this guy in, but also we're going to send someone else out. Always best player available for me, because you can work it out later and be able to get assets back on a guy if all of a sudden in their third year, or like, oh, this is a really good starter. We've got a really good starter. Rather than taking someone based on fit, and you take someone based on fit, and the person you were compromising your pick for, because you were like, I've already got a point guard. That point guard might not be who you think they'll be in 3 years' time. So you have to draft a player available.
Okay, you bring that up reminds me of the Sacramento Kings a couple years ago drafting. You mentioned Halliburton, and like they made it work. Honestly, like could the two have worked together? It was mixed returns, in that first year, but then Halliburton really took off the second year regardless. But at the same time, like you said, like they liked the point guard they had. They got the best player available, and in getting that best player, at that selection, they were able to parlay that to a big man who fit perfectly with the point guard that they decided to keep. So I definitely get where you're coming from with that. And I'm somebody who has vacillated between the two for sure. Because I'm like, no need to rock the boat. If I have, I don't know, I guess if I'm the Pacers and I have Halliburton, right? And I'm drafting high in the 2023 draft, and I like Scoop, maybe I don't take Scoop. Maybe I take Brandon Miller. But you're right. Like if Scoop's the better talent, and for this analogy I'm going with, then you should probably do that. And that's something I'm understanding more and more as I talk to people who are more experienced in, draft and evaluation circles than myself. And it's definitely helping to kind of change the way I look at it. So definitely appreciate your insight there. Let's talk about a few of these players. I kind of put this in terms of how you personally rank these players. And I said rank these 3 and then I gave you 5. But classic Corban there. But I wanted to use this time, like as you rank, to kind of talk about them a little bit. These are the bigger name players I've heard a lot in the draft, 2 of which I'm personally high on. Even though like I don't look at them as high as like clear cut number 1, or in the case of one of these players like top 5 picks. But I'm just going to run through these names, and then you can pick who you want to talk about first, and we can kind of go back and forth on it. But I have Ron Holland, Justin Edwards, Alexander Sarr, Matas Buzelis, and Jacoby Walter.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with Sarr, because I think he's the number 1 guy.
Okay.
Yeah. Being able to be around the growth of the Australian NBL and sort of see where these guys are at based on the local intel. Now, obviously, that I need to contextualize that with what is the the thoughts of the draft experts in the NBA. But like, I'll evaluate them with my lens, because I'm local and I won't change that. And the Australian NBL is a legitimate league. It's a legitimate league in a couple of ways, where the coaching is good, elite competition. You've got your really good role players or starters are guys like Denzel Valentine. So you've got someone who, was a first round pick, played, probably 400 games in the NBA, and these are the types of guys that like a Sarr is going against. And it's amazing, because some of these guys will only get, and not that minutes means they're not a good player, but they'll only get 15 to 20 minutes a night sometimes, showing how strong this league is. And it's not a development league. It's there because these teams win, big budgets in terms of salary, legit coaches who have coached in some of the best leagues in the world, in the NBA and Europe. And so for Sarr, elite physical tools, as a man defender, as a help defender, has shown some sort of sensational stuff. And I think, though, this is why the draft is a little bit weaker up top in previous years, is that this guy is phenomenal and is going to be a good NBA player.
Mm-hmm.
But offensively, as a guy that's 7 foot, like he's shown a bit of perimeter stuff, but he hasn't really shown inside that he's going to be absolutely dominant in terms of like, not that people run post ups now, but like that he hasn't really shown the inside game or absolutely killing people as a pick and roll threat.
Mm-hmm.
Showed a little bit with his shot, but I think needs to work a little bit on improving his perimeter game, even though he's shown more perimeter stuff than inside. But
Okay.
I think um, he has good upside. I think he's the number one guy based on he's going to be a sure thing as compared to what the other sure things are out there. So I have him. I have him first.
Okay. I
Yeah,
definitely like the way you described him. Do you have any concerns more about his offensive game? I mean, it
yeah,
seems kind of unrefined.
yeah. So his jumper isn't. I don't know. It's not bad, but it's like I don't think at the moment you look at him and say that he's going to be a plus shooter, meaning that you have to guard him in certain ways.
Yeah.
So, but because of the way that he moves and his length, sorry, in terms of his leaping ability and
Mm-hmm.
jumping ability and how long he is, I think that you um, could say that he's got some upside there inside. But I do have slight concerns. I don't have. I'm not sure about his offensive game in terms of like, can he make any more than stationary reads in terms of with the ball in his hands. So I do have slight concerns about his offensive game. So
Mm-hmm.
does he end up just being a really good starting five? In the league who'll shoot 32% from three and like his fourth year after having some development. Do have some slight concerns about his offense.
Yeah, I get you. That's kind of where I'm at on you with that.
Yeah, yeah,
Like just about the shot. I mean, I don't expect him to be like a playthrough guy, but you definitely don't want to be a liability there. And if he's somebody who like, uses size well, if he can just be like an adequate shooter, then I feel a lot better about it. But I do want someone there who like, I don't know. I guess I definitely know my own player evaluation. I skew more like, okay, defensively, you bring great things to the table. You have good hands, good rebounding, but I'm definitely higher on okay, offensively, what do you contribute, especially for like a number one pick.
yeah, 100%. So next
For sure.
I've got Edwards, Justin Edwards.
High on him myself.
Yeah, it's hard
It's
with
been
some
rough
of
so
these
far.
guys when you look at the tools that they have and you're trying to project. Um,
Yes.
like seems to be like a real solid overall player. Teams want really big dudes like him that can potentially play on the wing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, has some shooting range. Can attack the rim. Has base level skill set across the board that you would say would translate to him potentially being a really good starter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, pretty solid defensively. Looks like he's going to be a good 3-and-D role player with some high offensive upside. But for me, having not watched massive amounts of these types of dudes, um, I look at that guy as someone who could be a solid starter in the league. But I'm not able to say with any confidence as I reel off this list of players, that yes, if you could do this with 2019 draft class or 21 draft class or this draft class, some of these guys have star upside, but
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be betting my house on it in terms of any of these top 5 or 6 guys we're going to mention.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm real quick on Edwards. I'm with you. He's unreasonably high on my current board, just given the way he's played so far. I mean, mind you, college is barely 2 weeks old, but it's not been great. At the same time, you look at the tools, I look at a good shooter, I look at good positional size, like projectability on defense, and it's hard not to right now, especially in a class where, like you said, it's not like there's guys you can immediately put there and go, they're better hands down. So yeah, it's definitely gonna be tricky there. But I like Edwards at 2 on your list. But who's number 3?
Yeah, so I've got Ron Holland number 3.
I like that too.
Yeah, so I love the G League Ignite concept, but I saw a scorecard the other day where I think they got rolled by like 50. Now,
Yes, they've been getting
the
killed.
concept itself is great, but I
Mm-hmm.
think any time that it could be college, it could be D1 coaches looking at the competition in New Zealand and being like, well, how do I contextualize this? NBA teams will contextualize the competition that G League Ignite played against, and then how good they've been on their own in terms of they get rolled by someone or they roll other teams.
Mm-hmm.
But Holland seems really interesting. He's very, very young. I've looked at my research. He's very, very young. Doesn't turn 19 till after the draft. Pretty strong athlete. But how good does when you're looking at a guy that's 6'6", you're going to have to shoot it really, really well to be able to be a really good NBA player. Hasn't showed advanced skill yet to be able to prompt any of that star upside yet. Obviously has the physical tools to be there, but when you look at guys that will pop off and become future cornerstones or all-stars or NBA players at his size, you're going to have to add either really good defense or extra playmaking, playmaking at higher levels to be able to take that bump. And the research I did for this pod didn't show that that he sort of has that yet.
I agree. Like you said, at this point, I'm looking at him more like at 6'8", possibly tremendous wing defender. I like his first step. I like his drive. I feel he has some burst. And his three ball looks okay. I mean, the numbers don't really look great. But, yeah, he's somebody that I think would play well off of someone else. Definitely not someone you profile as like a go-to scorer off the top. But I'm with you. Just like Edwards, another guy who, like, in theory, we've seen this archetype player succeed. And so you're hoping that is something else that happens with these guys. But, like, off of just the body of work they've put together, at least in college or in Holland's case, the G League Ignite, the returns haven't been spectacular. But yeah, let's go on to your next one from there.
Yeah, so my pronunciation isn't always great. Matas Bazelis is my next guy. I've got at number 4. So when you're looking at for me, when you're looking to draft guys, and the end of the day, the draft will always be a crapshoot. You want to try and take the player who you think is the best prospect available. And look at my research, I'm like, okay, this guy's a good athlete at 6'10", who can knock down shots from the perimeter. That's super, super interesting. Anytime someone can do that. Now, is there a chance he doesn't pan out? Yeah, there's a chance he doesn't pan out, but there's a chance that the number 1 pick in a lot of years doesn't pan out. I mean, Wembanyama, obviously there's a dude who he was going to pan out, but when you're looking often in the NBA draft, it's a crapshoot. So I think of a guy here that's 6'10", can shoot it, good athlete. Seemed like he had some negative sort of press around how he went playing against the Australian NBL teams at the start of the year, and obviously that's high level competition against men. But he's a guy that I would have ranked next, but would ultimately need to see, is he able to do a little bit more off the dribble? Who does he guard? If I look at like a Davis Bertans, and I don't want to compare the dude to him, just because he's a white shooter. Just because he's a European shooter.
Sneaky athleticism too. No, I'm
kidding. Yeah. Obviously, more athletic, but
of course,
who you guard will obviously, influence where you sit in terms of matchups. And if someone is only able to guard the 5, and then they get buried on matchups and end up being a tweener, then obviously that changes. Now, I haven't watched enough to him to know who he's going to guard, but I think those concerns will always be there for someone like that. And then if they are unable to, then they become, a 6 or 8 year dude who takes 5 shots a game as a shooter and becomes like a Davis Bertans type. Which, hey, the guy's made a lot of money in his career, relatively successful NBA career. But in terms of what a team is looking for when they're like, okay, can we get a good role player who we can have on the team for 6 or 8 years, or or 4 or 5, and we trade them elsewhere and we get good assets back, then you're probably looking for someone that with the top 5 pick, someone that could potentially do this for longer. And I have some questions about him, but I would still take him if I was an NBA GM based on that upside.
No, I definitely like the way you broke that down. Even the way you said, like, okay, who is he guarding? How does his projection in the league, right? At the end of the day, offensively, I think, 6'9", he attacks downhill pretty fluidly from what I've seen. He seems to be able to, shoot the three ball pretty well. So I definitely like that. At worst case scenario, maybe a connected passer, additional ball handling guy. And the defensive, like you said, is something to look at, especially since I think he can be passive. And I'm still doing my own draft, not only the process, but just my own drafting. And it's just started, but he's someone I'm definitely curious about. But yeah, after Matas, what's next on the list?
Yeah, so now I've actually made a little change here, and you wanted to chat about Jacoby, and I've actually switched Jacoby out, and I've put Tyrese Proctor, the Australian from Duke.
I love it.
I didn't know as much about Jacoby, and actually knew next to nothing about him. So Tyrese Proctor is someone that I've known about for a while. Yeah. Shout out Michael Hubin. Michael's been picking these Australians, since they were 15 or 16, and Proctor at Duke, talking about a guy who has the on-ball creation skills, the IQ, potential ACC, it was ACC or freshman pick, and it's just a dude that be a two-way point guard, and will be able to operate, as a guy that can make reads out of ball screens and that sort of stuff. And if I think about what I want my point guard to do, if I'm drafting a team, or even if I'm a head coach of a college basketball team, I want someone who can guard multiple positions, who can make good reads and ball screens, and who can shoot the three at a league average level, be that NBA or college three. And if I look at Proctor, if he already has that baseline and you don't have any questions, well, here's someone who could potentially be a solid 6 to 10 year starter. Now, like, I don't like just predicting that. That's not the way that I work in terms of how I evaluate. But if you look at a guy like Proctor and he covers your baseline in terms of doing that stuff, then if anything else happens on top of that, then you're starting to work your way up and be like, okay, cool, good starter, max player, etc., etc. Obviously he reclassified, but he, has showed a bit more of his shooting. Maybe able to shoot it off the dribble. I really like Proctor and think he will be a top 10 pick, but it's also a crapshoot in terms of, does a guy go 5 or does he go 11? I don't actually think that matters for him, but he's a stud, and I think he can have a good NBA career.
I'm glad you brought up Proctor, not only for your background that you have on a player like him and just some of your own, again, experience to bear on there, but also a guy who, hasn't been talked about. I thought he had a really good run last season, especially toward the end of the season, particularly with the shooting. And you kind of talking about, some development he's had and also how long he's been watched, from your side is really, really cool. So, no, definitely glad that we talked about Tyrese Proctor as well. And I think it's a good club, at least for these 5 players to start with. And I'm sure the rest of our board will, come and take form as we continue on. But definitely a nice little primer of those 5. And so with that, I guess I lean kind of more again to players you've looked at. Are there any players that, I don't know, they're not overrated per se, but maybe you've heard their name a lot more than you're like, than you personally have them? That's probably a better way of saying that.
Yeah, well, I didn't know anything about Jacoby Walter, and I saw him on some draft boards at 10, so I thought I'd chat about him because he was on your list. Seems to have a well-rounded skill set, but I don't know. He was on a good high school team last year, but I'm just not sure, what his upside is in terms of, is he more of a solid guy similar to Proctor? Don't know as much about him. Doesn't seem like an amazing athlete, but that's a guy who I'm not as sure on. But some of that also could be because I haven't seen him a lot.
No, and that makes sense. I get it. It's one of those things, like you said, we continue to learn more. But he's somebody I've again, same thing. When I put him on the list, I've looked at him a little bit in terms of draft boards, but also I'm like, not really on my radar, So, always time for that to shine. On the alternative side of that, are there any players that you haven't heard a lot about that you're like, that's interesting? I kind of, think that they're something of a sleeper. They're not getting enough shine.
Yes, so I will bring up a sleeper who's another Australian, actually. So Alex Tui was a Gonzaga commit, and decommitted to go and play for the Sydney Kings in the Australian NBL. Now, he was the number one prospect on our list last year in terms of New Zealand and Australia. And the thing that you'll find as we talk more and more about these Australian New Zealanders is they know how to play the game. And it sounds ridiculous for me to say that's an underrated ability, but like, you got to know how to play basketball, man. You can be 16
you want.
gym, but if you can't play, you don't understand how to play the game, then you're going to struggle with that next tier. Tui's actually been mocked on some boards at the back of the first round, and I see a guy there that moves super well athletically. Has legitimate production on the Sydney Kings, who have won the NBL title in recent years. Playing against these type of guys, the SARS of the world, Denzel Valentine. You've got people who've played legitimate minutes in the NBA, not just like 3 games. Hundreds of NBA games, or they've been an NBA team for a season. And he's gone pro right away, and averaging 10 and 5, which is super impressive for a high level league. He's obviously was selected as a next star, meaning that he's one of the top 6 or 8 dudes that have been picked from the entire world to be a next star, and just one of just a few locals. Very, very high IQ, nice jump shot, showing that he's able to defend guys on switches, and he just seems to make the right play defensively, meaning you look at a guy like that and you're like, okay, cool, so he can shoot it. He's sorry, I think I've said before 16, he's 6'8", 6'9", super high IQ, can defend multiple positions, and seems like he may be able to shoot it better than what some people thought, just when I was researching this morning. So all of a sudden you've got a type of a Swiss Army knife player that if other stuff develops, then potentially you're talking about a guy that could be a really interesting role player in the NBA, maybe for a number of years. The Australian guys will often, and New Zealand's only had a few NBA players. We will have more in the future, but Australian guys have often come in and they've been able to play. Look at Josh Green, Josh Giddey, Dyson Daniels coming in and being high level role players, or potentially like a Giddey, future All-Star and 10-year player in the league, max player. They've shown the ability to be able to play at the highest levels and make the smart decisions, be a lockdown defender. Tui, I think, is a guy that's probably going to surprise some people, and that he's already getting, draft looks, jumping on boards after just, part of a season in the NBL. I think he's really, really interesting. So that's Tui, Toohey.
I like that. And I've heard of him a little bit in some of my initial kind of draft readings, but definitely, what do you see, I guess, as like an ideal, and it's early, but an ideal kind of team fit? And you don't have to say a specific team if you don't want to, but even like an archetype of a team where you can flourish back.
Yeah, so if I look at teams like Detroit Pistons, or teams that have been in rebuild for a while, I think that they need to solidify what they're trying to do by, and I'm not saying that Tui's a sure thing, but I think teams like that should be looking to draft guys that can come in and play a role at very high levels, and continuing to pick on-ball creators that, and like a lot of the on-ball creators in this Pistons are going to work out. It's not that, but if you're like, oh, I've got the, I don't know what picks that they have, but if I've got the 27th pick in the draft and this is a guy I'm going to go and jump in and take, well, hey, here's a guy that potentially can come in and provide you with something to give you more starch defensively, and can spot up and hit those knockdown, those sort of threes from the corner. So teams like that could probably use a guy like that. But then also, I don't know, he seems like the kind of guy that could be quite versatile. So that could apply to teams in other situations as well.
Okay, I definitely like that for sure. And thank you for answering. That's something I'm always curious about with players. I'm learning about more. Like, okay, how can I visualize them on the team to kind of have a better understanding of them as a player? I am interested in a player that you talked about given your experience that I think you'd be a little bit of an expert on. In fact, I have read his name a few times since we've talked, but I am not going to be the one to butcher the name here since I'm also iffy pronunciations. I'm gonna let you introduce the name, but also can you tell me more about him and his game? And please let me know how to say it, and for those listeners who will probably be hearing a lot more about this one.
Yeah, so Julius Halifanua,
Okay, that's close.
Special player from New Zealand. New Zealand has had 4 NBA players in the past, and Steven Adams was the only guy. Steven Adams and then Sean Marks were the two that stuck. Obviously, Steven Adams, 10-year center, one of the best role-playing players and one of the best centers in the league. Julius Halifanua is a 7-foot center who's in the class of 2025 from New Zealand. Known about him for a little while, and the first thing that sticks out is, if you were to watch his film, is his fluidity, his skill, and touch at his size. This is a huge body. This guy is huge, super strong, and that strength is natural. And last year was actually his first full serious year of basketball, even though he'd been playing, since he was younger. Last year was his first full year, and I actually saw him in the FIBA Asia Cup and then the FIBA World Cup play for New Zealand, and shows a beautiful jumper. Already starting to show at that age, 7 foot, catching the ball in the mid post, rip through, drop step, finishing on the other side of the rim. Like, body wasn't really sort of developed or worked on at that point, but he'd only just turned 16, so we'll give him that.
Yeah.
Gets selected as only the second New Zealander ever after Ben Gold, who's ended up at Marquette, and who played 10 minutes a game last year on the team that won their conference title. Julius is the only the second New Zealander selected for the NBA Global Academy, and he was there with guys like Tui that we just spoke about. Previous people to come out of the NBA Global Academy were Dyson Daniels and Josh Giddey, both first round picks. Both top 50 guys. Julius's character, super hard worker, and I'm always really high on the character of kids because ultimately that will decide how far they go.
That's true.
But for his size, is super, super skilled. This year, for me, was when I saw him play against Australia. Often New Zealand plays against Australia and FIBA play, and we get rolled. When I say we, I'm not a fan anymore. I work in this game, but obviously when I see these kids coming up from New Zealand, I still want them to beat Australia because Australia is like our natural rival.
Of course.
Julius had something like 30 and 10 in that game, and he was the best player on the court. And he would post up, baseline fadeaway, or shooting threes beautifully, shooting 8 of 11 or 8 of 10 from the line, and showing that legitimate free throw shooting percentage. Here is a guy that potentially could be a plus shooter, is 7 foot tall, moves incredibly well in the open court. He's not like a freak athlete or anything like that, but his fluidity and his ability, if he gets caught on a switch, to be able to guard other guys, as well as having that elite strength down low to guard the biggest threats. This is going to be New Zealand's next NBA player. I've tried to work on the way that I come across in terms of social media and podcasts and not just exclaiming stuff, but I think this is going to be New Zealand's next NBA player. He already has interest from, a bunch of really big high major programs. And the beauty of it is, because these kids from New Zealand and Australia, no one really knows about them. I'm really excited to see when he pops off in a year or two that we can come back to this conversation. Not that it's about me being right, more that I'm just happy for New Zealand to be having some of these prospects that are at this level. So Julius is going to be special, going to be a great two-way player. And I think he's going to play in the NBA.
No, I love it. And as a friend of yours, I'm happy to say I want you to be right too. So like both, it's like, yes, for the player to pop off, great, but also like to be, especially, again, it's one of those things where in the draft space, it's so fickle, right? Like, and it's very, like, I love Twitter because of the conversations you can have, but we all know they can get toxic real quick on some of that. But what I love especially is having people like yourself, or people, saying, hey, keep an eye out for this guy. Like this guy could be something in a year or two. And then that person becomes something a year or two. Like that's what I love, because it's like a fruition of the scouting process and your faith and belief in the player, that you go to bat for because you have seen their work firsthand. And I just think there's something really, really cool about that. So no, I'm definitely gonna talk to you more about that behind the show here, but I wanted to hear firsthand about him, because seeing some of the footage, like you said it, the fluidity in his body, you know, and like you said, not overly like crazy athletic, but just knowing how to move his body. There's something to be said for that. You have those gangly folks who, all no disrespect to them, they just don't know where they're going. They're kind of clumsy, or whatever the case may be. But one thing that got me, his touch, like you said, from three, from the like, even around the basket, like the way he's able to incorporate some contact, adjust the touch on the shot as he goes for a hook or a fade, or like I really like his potential as a really good shooting big
man. Yeah. He's special, man, and like as you say, like these high character kids, seeing them succeed and be able to be a role model for the next kids that are coming through from New Zealand. And he comes from a small family from Auckland, and yeah, it's super exciting for New Zealand basketball to see guys like that coming through.
Absolutely. Well, Stevie, I gotta say thank you for sharing a little bit about him. Thank you for just talking draft with me in general. This has been a fun conversation. I heard your story, all of that. I have one last question for you. And every year I try to ask new guests a different question. I think last year was like, who is your top five? You're going to build a top five of like your favorite players, not necessarily your best players, but your favorite. This year I'm taking it to the court. Like you play basketball, you're on the court. And I want to know what your go-to move on the pickup court is, because for me, I have I have a Sean Marion shot, and I'm not afraid to admit that. It goes down, ball go and hoop. That's all I care about. But I got a good I got a good step back going to my left, and if you overplay that, I have a smooth spin move going to my right. Those are my go-to moves, and I need to know yours, CP. I need to know.
Okay, so I have a particular role in basketball. So like, I'm just a little bit over 6 foot, so not tall by any means, but I got quite a decent wingspan for my size. And I just play. Doesn't matter if I'm matching up like against a 6'7" dude in pickup. I'm not a great basketball player, but so I don't really like shoot it or anything. I've got a little bit of a floater. And I just play super hard. I'm just like a madman running up and down and hitting the board. So for me, there's 2 things I love is that I've worked really hard on my game to be able to like, sort of screen and then roll and then have a bit of a finish. But because I just like to play big at my 6 foot, 180 pounds or whatever it is. I do like to fake a handoff and then run to the basket like a crazy person with a loose handle and then get fouled or potentially finish. So a fake handoff, or the feeling when you get a nice contact on the screen and then you get hit with a nice pass on the roll, like that's probably that's like the ultimate feeling. Like how often I finish those, you're gonna have to come and watch me and be absolutely disgusted by my my movement patterns. But I love it, man. I love it. I still love playing pickup, and I think the beauty is that no matter, if you're a 50-year-old dude playing soccer or whatever, to myself, like I'm 36 and you can still learn and you can still grow in this game. And so for me, I've actually really enjoyed playing lots of pickup and trying to work on my game and, trying to learn more. And yeah, man. So I'd say that, a little bit of a cheeky pick and roll or faking a handoff and somehow beating a quicker guy to the rim are probably my 2 go-tos.
I love that. We know next time we meet up in Vegas or something, I need to see it firsthand for sure, because that's a blast. And also, I need to redeem myself. Last time in Vegas, we played at the Tarkanian courts. We had like a run from like midnight till 2 a.m, like in between summer league games. And let me tell you, I was not ready for that heat. I was so tired. I didn't even attempt a shot. It was a funny time. But yeah, that'll have to happen, Steve. I appreciate it. The fake give and go. I like it. That's what I need to put in my toolkit for sure. But listen, my friend, thank you again for coming on and giving me some time here tonight. Can you tell the good folks where they can find you and your work? You already explained like what you're doing, but just to see more of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Airtime Scouting is our platform on Twitter and on Instagram. Like the go-to place to find out about prospects from Australia and New Zealand. At the moment, we are just doing men's. we're finding ways to continue growing what we're doing, so we're able to work in the women's space. But we're just working on the men's at the moment. But Airtime Scouting is where you can find us on Twitter and Instagram, and then you can find me at Stevie Cozens on Instagram and Twitter. And super appreciative of of you bringing me on, Corban, and just like it's a really exciting sort of space to be in, and I'm really excited to see where you go and how we can keep fostering our relationship as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Be prepared for me to pick your brain a lot more here moving forward, Stevie. But thank you. Seriously. Thank you for your time and your insight. And our friends have been just giving, a good conversation about life and basketball, which is the two biggest things here. So definitely make sure to check out, of course. And thank you again. And check out Stevie, y'all. At Stevie Cozens, STEVIECOZENS. Again, I have that in the description, but on X, Twitter, whatever, Instagram, all of that. Make sure to follow him and his work. You can follow me on Twitter at Corban NBA, CORBAN NBA. Also on Instagram, even though I'm kind of trash at Instagram, but I appreciate any looks my way there. So thank you for that. But listen, this has been another great episode of the Ramble podcast. And for Stevie, for myself, we are Frosty. Y'all stay frosty, and we'll talk to y'all real soon. All right, y'all.